What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and today we're going to learn a helpful tip or set of techniques on how you can teach Emacs to keep your folders clean. So if you've used Emacs for very long, you've probably noticed these files that Emacs will create in random places. Well, not really random places, but they'll create in various places on your file system, mainly to store old versions of files, or maybe some information about an open file, or maybe even some information about things being used by various packages that you've installed. So maybe you've seen a file like this emacs.org with the tilde behind it, which is usually for backup files. There's the file name that has the hash symbols on both sides, which is usually for the autosave state. And there's also like the .hash of the file for like locking or file locking. And there's also various different files that will be created in your .emacs.d folder, where basically a package has decided to put its own sort of temporary variable storage inside of your Emacs folder, mainly because it needs to be persisted across Emacs sessions and not be deleted. So that's the reason why they wouldn't put it in maybe like your temp folder instead, because they want to make sure that this information is kept between sessions. So, you know, like lsp-mode will create its own file. This transient folder has like some history information in it. Projectile has its own set of bookmarks of projects of yours that it's found. So there's various different things that will be created in your folders, both in the folders where you edit files and also your main Emacs configuration folder across the life of your Emacs sessions. So what we're going to learn today is how you can try to clean these up and put them in a central place that you can sort of keep them out of your source control and keep them out of your hair. So first of all, we're going to talk about backup files. This is the most common one that people will see whenever they use Emacs, because these backup files will get created automatically by Emacs whenever you edit a file that's not under source control. So if you use a source controlled folder, like if you use git in a folder, these files don't get created automatically, but in any other folder, like if you edit a file in your home folder, then as soon as you save it, it will probably create a backup file. And the reason why is because Emacs is trying to ensure that for whatever reason, you don't lose the original contents of the file if you want to go back to it. So it's just trying to help you out. So let's just see an example of this real quick. I'm going to pull open our custom Emacs configuration we've been working on in this channel, and we're just going to try this out and see if we can make this backup file show up. So we're going to create a new file called test.org in the home folder. And I'm just going to put some simple stuff in here like hello system crafters. And I'm going to save this file. I'm going to use drred jump to open the folder. And we can see right now we only have test.org visible. But if I were to go make another edit to this file and save it, and then use drred jump to go back to the folder, if I refresh the folder, we'll see now there's this test.org with a tilde in it. And if you open that file, you'll see it had the original contents of test.org. I believe if we edit this again, and then look at the test.org tilde file, use revert buffer, it doesn't actually have the newer changes because it's only saving the state of the buffer at the time that you open it before the first save. So this is just something to keep in mind if you're depending on these backup files. So what we can do to make so that these files do not show up in the same folder where you edited the file originally, we can use the backup directory alist variable, which basically defines a list of folder prefixes that backup files must be evaluated from, and then where they should go whenever the backup file is created. So I'm gonna copy this configuration over, and then we will talk about what it's doing. I've added a new section in the emacs.org file in our repo, and it's called Keep Folders Clean. So we're going to go from there. All right, so if we look at the help of backup directory alist with Control-HV, then what it tells us is that the alist of file name patterns and backup directory names. Each element looks like a regular expression and a directory as a pair. And backups of files with names matching the regular expression will be made in directories. So basically what we're saying here is that the regular expression is dot, meaning basically match everything. And then when you see that regular expression get matched, we want to put it into this folder. So what we're actually doing is using our user Emacs directory variable, which tells us where our Emacs home folder is, technically speaking. If we look at the description of this variable, it will tell us the directory beneath which additional per user Emacs files are placed. I have customized this in my setup to use a different folder because I'm trying to isolate it from my personal Emacs configuration, but usually it is your root folder /.emacs.d. So what we're going to do here is set this so that it will put any backup file into a subfolder of our user Emacs directory under temp/backups. And this is just something I picked arbitrarily. You can put it wherever you want. It's just helpful to have a sort of a folder name where all these sort of transient files go so that you can ignore that in your .gitignore file. So I'm going to use Control-X, Control-E to run this. And now we should be able to see that this variable has been set. If I use a Control-HV again, we can see now the value has what we expect in it. This project's code, Emacs from scratch /temp/backups. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to that test.org file. I'm going to jump into dired and delete the backup real quick so that we can make sure that this actually creates a backup in the right place. So I'm going to use capital D to delete, say yes. I'm also going to kill the buffer. Now I will... let me kill this just to make sure. I'm going to go and reopen the file, test.org. And now I'm going to make another edit. Let's see, last edit. I'm going to save it. And now let's use dired jump, refresh. Okay, so we don't see that there's a test.org with a tilde after it. But let's go into our .emacs.d folder. Oh, actually, no. Let's go into our project's code Emacs from scratch folder. Now we can see that there is a folder called temp inside. If we go inside of that, now we can see there's backups folder. And then we see there is this strangely named file that has exclamation points before every part of the path where the original file was located. So this is how Emacs is able to figure out what original file this backup file pertains to. So we successfully moved the backup of that file from our home folder to this folder instead. So this is a pretty big win whenever you're using Emacs for a while, because now you don't have to worry about having backup files strewn all about the place. Those kind of are a pain to deal with whenever you're working in Git repos. You'll have to set up your gitignore to ignore the files with the tilde at the end, all that stuff. Now you don't have to do that anymore. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Oh, one last thing I want to say. If you want to turn off the use of backup files entirely, like let's say most of the editing you do of files is in Git repositories, you don't really care about backup files, you can use the make backup files variable, set that to nil, and that will turn off backup file functionality entirely. So if you don't really care about that feature, you can definitely turn it off. I've also got a link to the manual here with more information about file backups in case you want to learn more about that. All right, so moving on to autosave files. So autosave mode will create temporary files in the same folder as the files that you are editing, but it happens whenever you have unsaved edits unsaved edits in a buffer for a file that haven't been saved yet. So let's go and use this file as an example, actually. So if I were to add something here, let's just say set Q. So I've just added some text, but I haven't saved it. You can see down here in the mode line that the text here is red because I haven't saved it yet. If I were to use Control-X-J to do dired jump, you can see now that we have the #emacs.org hash name here because this is the sort of auto-saved information from the file that is being held while I haven't saved it yet. So basically, this makes it so that if Emacs happens to crash or your computer turns off for whatever reason, there's a file that's been saved with the temporary state of that file before you actually save the real file so that you can get back to it if you have to. Let me see, what was I going to say there? So the way that you want to deal with this to make sure that these files don't show up in the same folder as the file where you're editing it is to use the autosave file name transforms variable. If you look at the description for that autosave file name transforms, it tells you that transforms to apply to buffer file name before making the autosave file name. So basically, it takes the buffer name and then it applies a regular expression to then come up with the name of the file to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this code over. I'm going to show you how this works. And one thing you have to keep in mind is you actually do have to create the directory that you want to store these in advance, because unlike the backup feature, Emacs does not automatically create this directory for you. It's basically what you're doing is you're giving it a regular expression to manipulate the buffer name, and it doesn't think that it's a file path, so it doesn't try to create the file path to ensure that it exists. So you have to do that work for it, basically. And all we're really doing is just at some point in our config, we are creating this path based off of our user Emacs directory. And if we were to evaluate this statement and look at the mini buffer, you'll see that it's under projects code Emacs from scratch /temp/autosaves. So if I run this code, it will create that directory for us. So now we don't have to worry about that being a problem. And then we can set the autosave file name transforms. I'm also setting this variable autosave list file prefix, which I believe is for saving session files for the current open Emacs session. That is something that will also show up. I'm not sure where they originally show up. Actually, let's just check that real quick. Let's check the variable for that. So by default, it's under emacs.d/autosave list/.saves dash. So basically, we're trying to keep that the autosave list folder from showing up in our .emacs.d folder, because I don't want to see that folder there. It's not part of my configuration, so let me just put it somewhere else where I don't have to look at it. So I'm gonna run, well, yeah, let's save this file first. Let's verify that the hash file is now gone. So now if I refresh this, the hash file is gone because we actually saved the buffer and that autosave info is not needed any longer. I'm gonna run this using Control-X, Control-E to set up these variables. And now if I make another edit to this file, let's just add a couple lines. And then we can see that the file is not saved at the moment. And if we use Control-XJ to go back into DIRED, well, it seems to still be showing up, which is interesting. Let me double check what I did here to make sure it's correct. So it's same kind of idea here is that the transforms is a list of regular expressions that is supposed to be applied to the buffer name, and then it tells it where to put the file. I think I actually have an error in the syntax here. I think it's supposed to be oh, maybe not. Double checking. So that's that, and then another item, and then T. So regular expressions, replacement, uniqueify. Okay, so we're setting transforms to, let me make sure that I have it set up as a list the right way too. Yeah, so it's a nested list. And then we're doing that. So now let me check it one more time to make sure that I have the right format in this as well. Temp autosaves. Okay, maybe. Okay, so this should be working. Let's, oh, you know what? I think that it saves this information per buffer, so I actually need to kill this buffer and reopen it, and then I think that the change will go into effect. So let me double check that, because I think I had this problem when I was preparing for the episode as well. So I'm going to delete these two lines that I had created. I'm going to use Control-XJ to open up DIRED, and now we don't see the file there anymore. It has disappeared once I refresh the buffer. If I go into the temp/autosaves folder, now we see there's a file here using the same kind of path notation that we have seen before with the exclamation points to sort of denote the different parts of the path. And it's saving the autosave information here instead. So now we don't have those files that are showing up transiently while we have a file open and with current edits. This is kind of useful in case you have file watcher tools that are watching the folder and like a new file comes up that has code in it and the file watcher tries to do something with it. That can be helpful in that case to keep those files out of there. The next type of file we're going to look at is also kind of a problem for this, which is the lock files. So those are the ones that have the dot hash and then whatever the file name, the original file name was. This can really be a problem when you have these files being created in a folder and you've got some tool watching the folder. Like let's say you have some a tool that's cross-compiling JavaScript code from TypeScript to JavaScript, and you edit a file and it creates this new something.ts file that is a temporary file basically, but your build watcher actually picks up on that file and tries to compile it, and it can't compile it because it's not a real file. So One of the people in the System Crafters Discord, Max Munoz, actually was the one who brought this up the other day and did provide us with a solution that will work for this case, which is basically to turn off this lock file functionality. So the reason why we have lock files in Emacs to begin with is to prevent the two sessions of Emacs from trying to edit the same file at the same time if there are unsaved changes. So these files only show up when there are unsaved changes usually. I believe that's going to be the case. We didn't see it just now. Oh, the reason why we didn't see it because I wasn't showing hidden files. So since this file is still not saved, so we're going to go back into DRED, Control-X, Control-J. I'm going to use Shift-H. In this configuration, we have Shift-H set up to show hidden files. Now we're going to see that there's this .#emacs.org file that's pointing somewhere. It's a symbolic link. But this is a lock file that's getting created because we have made an unsaved edit to this file. So it's basically trying to save us from having somebody else come and save a change to that file while we have it unsaved, basically. This is kind of a useful feature. However, maybe you don't really need it in a lot of cases. So you can turn this off by setting create lock files to nil. That way, the lock files will not get created whenever you have an unsaved file. I don't recommend doing this across the board in your configuration. I don't recommend setting it by default in your config because probably you do, in most cases, want to have lock files. However, if you do have a project where you've had trouble with lock files getting caught by some other tool that you're using, then you can use a directory local variable to turn off lock files for that project only. So if you go back to watch the video we did about file and directory local variables, you can use that same approach to set this to nil for that folder only. So I would recommend doing that if you have this problem. All right, so next we're going to talk about files created by packages. So like I mentioned before, Projectile, lsp-mode, a few other packages that you're going to use will create their own temporary files that are in your Emacs folder that are used to hold information that are needed for future Emacs sessions on that same computer. There are variables for many of these packages to define where these files should go. So you can find those variables and set them, but generally you have to go consult the documentation for the package that you're using to make sure you can find the right variable name to set that path. So it is a little bit of a pain to have to track all these things down if you use a lot of packages that have their files they create. The couple that we have already mentioned here are the Projectile known projects file and the LSP session file. And what I used to do in my configuration was to use the user Emacs directory to say, I want to move this somewhere else or move it to some other folder entirely. You can move it to the temp folder if you wanted to. I don't really recommend it, but you could do that. There is an easier approach. Many packages that have their own files that get saved inside of the user Emacs folder, they do use the user Emacs directory by default. So this could be an easy fix for you, which is just to set the user Emacs directory in your configuration to something else so that those files automatically get placed in the new location rather than in your own .emacs.d folder. For me, what I was doing before was to put them in the, or I still do actually, put them in the .cache/Emacs folder because apparently .cache is a convention in the Linux sort of file system layout where if you have like cache files for programs, they would go in this .cache folder. So I'm creating a /Emacs folder under that to hold all of these temporary files for Emacs. The thing you need to know about this is that you need to set this very early in your configuration so that any package you load will base its file path variables on this user Emacs directory variable. Because like if you look at the documentation for, let's say LSP, whoops, I'm going to use Control-HV and I'll look up LSP session file. So by default, what it's doing, if you look at the def custom, is it's using expand file name and this locate user Emacs file function. If I look at the documentation for locate user Emacs file, it returns an absolute per user Emacs specific name. If new name exists in user Emacs directory, return it. So basically it's looking at the user Emacs directory. So if you want to make sure that the LSP session file and many other files from various packages get put into a place that's not your main Emacs folder repo, you can use the user Emacs directory. Also, you would want to, probably to follow the convention we've been doing so far, you would want to set it in your current Emacs folder location under temp. So I didn't do that here, but it's something that you can also do. So lastly, I want to give you a solution that could be better for you if you don't have a problem installing a community package to take care of this for you, and that is the no-littering package. This is a package that is maintained by some well-known folks in the Emacs community, like Tarsius, Jonas Bernoulli, who maintains the Magit or Maggot package, or had written and maintains the Magit package. And basically what it does is it has a set of known variables for different packages that, and also built-in Emacs functionality so that it can move all these files for you without you having to do it yourself. And the great thing about it is it's just as easy as just putting it into your configuration with use package. It will, whenever it gets loaded up, it will automatically set all the stuff for you. So let's take a look real quick at the website for that. And you'll see that it's basically just a package with a single elist file that has the configuration info. It's good to go look at this README because they do have some information about usage and things you may want to set. Like for instance, they have two different folders that they use for moving certain Emacs files to, the etc directory and the var directory. So if you want to put them in a different location, you could do that. By default, they're using the user Emacs directory and making a subfolder there. So if you don't like the way they do that, then maybe you want to put that somewhere else. Actually, I think that's not the default. They're just showing an example of how you could change that. So another thing is they also mentioned the trick we did earlier with the autosave settings. If you want to put those files under the no littering path as well, there's a function you can use, or two functions actually, the no littering expand var file name, and I think there's also the no littering expand etc file name functions that will give you the path to those things. So if there's anything else that you also want to include that that no littering doesn't include by default, you can also put them in the same folder just by using these functions to find those paths. So let's pull this in real fast and just see what it does. So it does do everything based off of user Emacs directory. So make sure you set user Emacs directory first if you want it to be somewhere else before you use this package. So I'm going to say use package no littering. I'm gonna use Control-X, Control-E to install that. And now I'm gonna go and look at the, let's say, projectile, let's see, is it, come on. Projectile path, nope, it's not that. History, nope. What was the variable name that I said that was before? That is projectile known projects file. So let's look at that. Projectile known projects file. So now, no littering has changed this variable to be under my user Emacs folder, which is projects code Emacs from scratch, to this /var/projectile/known projects.el. So no littering has done this based on its own knowledge of this variable and also where it wants to be placed. You can go and take a look at the code for this package to get some hints on which variables it is going to change by scrolling down to, actually, let's look it up here, no littering, so we can actually see it a little bit better. I'm gonna pull it up this way. So there's a whole list of variables that it's setting, and like abbrev file name, auto insert directory. There's all kinds of stuff that I have never thought about before, but thankfully it thinks about it for me, so I don't have to worry about it. So it's really useful, I think, to use this package, because if you see, there's lines and lines and lines of things that it can save you from having placed around in your Emacs folder. So I find it to be pretty useful from that perspective. However, if you don't want to use this third-party package to do that, you can just go and grab whatever variables from this file that you think that you're going to need to move in your Emacs configuration and just do it yourself. You don't need to pull in this third-party file package if you don't want to. So it's just a convenience for you if you're willing to pull in the package. But like I said, if not, you don't have to. All right, I think that's everything that I wanted to cover today on that topic. Let's see, I believe that's the last slide. So I think one thing I want to talk about next that is sort of related to this is improving Emacs startup time. That's a common problem that people have, where if you start to build up your configuration a lot and you have a lot of packages, you need to use some techniques to speed up that startup time so that the first boot of Emacs isn't so slow. We'll talk about that in a future video. I'm not sure if it'll be next week or another week in the coming weeks, but that will be something interesting to watch out for. And finally, I would like to thank my sponsors, both on GitHub and on Patreon. Your support for this channel really means a lot to me. It's really inspiring and helps me to keep going and making these videos. If you are interested in becoming a sponsor of the channel, please take a look at both of the links here. They're in the description of the video as well, so you don't have to go type them in. You can just go copy or click them from the YouTube description. And also, if you want to see the new videos that we post every week, we're doing it like 2 recorded videos a week and 1 stream per week now. So definitely click the subscribe button and make sure to click the bell icon so that you get notified for every video, because YouTube likes to not give you certain notifications whenever it decides that for whatever reason it thinks you don't want them. So make sure to click the bell so that you get all of them, so you're notified whenever we post videos or before we go live on Fridays. All right, so I think that's everything for today. So until next time, thanks a lot for watching and happy hacking. See ya.